Hello, everybody, and thank you once again for taking the time to want to listen to what I have to say. My name is Chris. This is my channel, Barnun 11970. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know there are plenty of times where I like to try and describe things in the easiest way possible, keeping it very basic. Not meant to insult anybody's intelligence, but what I've discovered is, especially in this world of propaganda, misinformation, um, just how overly complicated some things can get. I can see how some people, when they see something that's just too complicated or too detailed or, just something they don't grasp, that they might be afraid to ask questions and they may shy away from things. So I try and, like you could see in some of these videos, I try and keep things very simple. So this way, some people will get the ground level of what's going on, feel comfortable enough to say, okay, let me research further from there. Because just imagine if your first day of kindergarten, a teacher drops down a calculus book. You don't know how to read, you don't know how to write, you probably don't even know your ABCs, and now you're expected to do calculus. I mean, that's what this could be like for some people. So I try and keep things basic. So keep that in mind and be patient with what I try and teach. Now, when it comes to war, unfortunately, throughout history, we've basically been told it's stuff that we can't control, and there's always a bad guy and there's always a good guy, and situations happen to where people die. It's happened since the days of the Roman empires. It happened in the days of the Egyptians, the Babylonians. It goes way back. I mean, obviously, we haven't improved as a society in centuries because we are still going through wars. We just make them better names so we could feel comfortable with them, like actions and other things like that. But make no mistake, it's not what you're told it is. They tell you the whole propaganda part to make you wave your flags and justify what is basically theft of other people's property and murder for whatever reasons. And we pretty much know throughout history it boils down to power, control, and money, or what they tell you is money. And that's really what it boils down to. It really boils down to those things. Because if you think about a war, wars cost money. Soldiers do not work for free. The people who sell the food to feed the soldiers do not give it away. The people who make the weapons and the armor and the tools and the equipment, they don't say, here's my hard labor, here's my materials that cost me lots of money, I'm going to give it away to you. No. You have to pay for those things. You have to pay for the weapons. You have to pay for the training. You have to pay for the military. You have to pay for the equipment, the food, the transportation, everything. Now, when all of a sudden a war is thrust upon the people, they can cost, especially nowadays, trillions of dollars. Now, where does a country get that money? Well, if you follow the money, you will know that they borrow the money from banks. So if you really put it in proper perspective, the banks don't care who is borrowing the money, because don't they lend it to both sides? Think about that. Now, one thing about war, if you look throughout history, they tend, and I've spoken about this in other videos, so if you've already heard this and you think it's redundant, well, then, you don't have to listen, or you could make a video that's better. I mean, that's your choice. Do what you want. But if you ever notice in most wars, they never kill the leaders or where the leaders stay. They tend to hurt the people. Look at, for example, in World War II. How it happened, we're not going to get into. Why it happened, we're not going to get into. We're not going to talk about that stuff here. But ultimately, in the end, one of the main reasons that made World War II come to an end is when our country, the United States of America Corporation, dropped 2 bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Now, if you look at those 2 areas on the map of Japan, you will see it is nowhere near the Prime Minister of Japan, the leaders, the emperor. So they didn't bomb the leaders and killed them. What they did was they bombed the people. Now, the question to always ask is why? And I'm going to put it in a perspective that will help you to understand it better. Think of it as me being a cattle rancher and you being a competitive cattle rancher. We both live in the same area or close enough to where our businesses are interacting and affecting one another. I have 10,000 cattle. You have, let's say, 13,000 cattle. Our businesses is to sell the cattle for the meat industry. So we make money off of the cattle. So, of course, we're going to have to feed them. We're going to have to give them shelter. We're going to have to protect them. Now, of course, we're not going to feed them, the best food out there. We're not going to give them Avion water. We're just going to give them the bare minimum, enough to keep them alive. So this way we can build them up so we can have them slaughtered. So think of the cattle rancher as any government, and think of the cattle as the people. Because, of course, government's job is not to murder everyone like they do talk about in a lot of fear channels. Because think of it, if you were the owner of your cattle, what benefit would you get from abusing, murdering, and attacking your cattle? By making them sick? How are you going to sell them? By killing them? What money are you going to make off of that if you blow them up? No. So there's a lot of fear out there because fear equals control, because they make you afraid because it's all free will. Because you'll get scared, so you'll make the choice to say, I need to stay away. But if you think of it from a logical perspective, if you are a cattle rancher, aka a government, and you are in the business of making money off of your cattle, aka the people, you're going to give them enough protection, enough food and water, enough supplies for them to produce something for you to make you money. You're not going to kill them. That's just dumb. So let's assume the other cattle rancher is going to do the same thing with their livestock. Because after all, if you're going to beat up your cattle and you're going to kill them all by blowing them up and you're not going to give them food and water, well, you're not going to make any money, are you? Well, where do governments make their money? They make their money off of taxes, which is from the hard labor of the people who are working to give the part of their money away so the governments can play on, like especially in this country, I can't speak for others, but to play on Wall Street and gamble our money away and then have us bail it out and call it the word taxes. I've made videos talking about this into further detail. If you want to know more about that, please check it out. So just think of me as a cattle rancher getting really upset with the other cattle rancher getting into my territory. I'm losing money because they are interfering with my cattle ranching business. Maybe they're selling theirs for cheaper. Maybe they have a better quality cattle. Maybe they're just being sneaky and undercutting me in my territory, and I want to eliminate them. Now think of it from a perspective of war. If I'm at war with another cattle ranching business, what would be the benefit if I killed the owner of that cattle ranch? Now just think about that for a second. If I killed the head rancher, well, couldn't somebody else take over the business? Can't one of his family members? Can't one of his friends? Or maybe he had a will and bequeathed it to somebody down the street? So it doesn't really hurt. I mean, it might hurt that individual, obviously, but the business will continue because let's say I decide I'm going to try and get rid of that other cattle rancher. I'm going to murder him. So I go in the middle of the night, shoot the guy in the head, and he's dead. And then everybody's sad, and all these things happen, and then I see the next day, his brother takes over the business, and he continues to do what they've been doing. And probably even more serious now, taking more of my money, trying to put me out of business. So that's not really going to help. But if I all of a sudden decided to steal or kill his property, his cattle, well, then he no longer has product, does he? So it would injure them more if I took away the very thing that is causing me pain. So if you think about that throughout any war, now, of course, there are always exceptions to every rule, but the majority of these wars had to do with taking somebody else's land, taking somebody else's wealth, their materials, their people, their money, quote unquote. And killing the king or the president or the governing rule, the rulers, makes no sense because they can always be replaced. I mean, look at what they said when they were trying to convince everybody that we needed to murder Osama bin Laden. Weren't they telling you the whole time he was alive that, oh, if we can only get him, this war would be over? Well, didn't they supposedly get him? And I say that supposedly because, they didn't show any proof about it. They dumped them supposedly in the ocean so you could never be able to prove it. But, that's a story for another time. But didn't somebody else just take over and take his place? So think about that in war. It doesn't pay to kill the ranch leader. But if you kill the people and murder the people, well, then they lose revenue, don't they? Because let's say I am the country of Bulgaria. I'm the leader of that country. I have 1 million people that I make money off of. And I am at war with, let's just say, Romania. And they have 1 million people, and the leaders are making money off of their people. And they're doing trades around the world that are undercutting my trades, and it's interfering with me. I don't like the competition. So if I was to go and send somebody, because that's what they do, they don't do it themselves. They send other people to do their dirty work for them. Let's say I send somebody to murder the leader of Romania. Well, does that solve my problem? Because won't somebody else now become the new leader of Romania and they'll continue business as scheduled? But if all of a sudden I have my military go and murder their people who pay the taxes, who build the roads, who man the hospitals, who help with their business, and if I murder enough of them, well, they're going to back away, aren't they? Because they have two choices: back away and give in and say, okay, we'll stop doing what we're doing, or I'll just murder them to the point where they have nothing left, because then they can't earn any taxes. Then they can't have the roads built and the schools built and the propaganda being spread. So you see what the bigger picture of what war is really all about? Because they try and convince you, especially nowadays in this century of modernization, that we're supposedly above all that and civilized. But yet, put it in perspective, just in this country alone, because I live in the United States, I can't really talk about anywhere else. You'd have to do it yourself if you live differently. But just imagine, for those of you who live in the United States corporation, that all of a sudden you turn on the TV tomorrow and you hear on the news that China, Russia, and Iran built military bases in Texas, New York, and California. You'd be pretty outraged about that, wouldn't you? You'd want them out of your country, wouldn't you? And just imagine when you went to confront these countries building on your land military bases, and all of a sudden on the news, you are now spoken to as a terrorist. And the whole world sees you as a terrorist for doing nothing more than wanting people off of your land. Well, you'd be pretty upset too, wouldn't you? And yet, we have, over 120, 130 some odd military bases in other countries? See the hypocrisy? Now, some people will sit there and say, oh, you're not American. No, I live in America. I remember what our forefathers tried to establish here, which was a republic, getting away from the oppression. That's what they tried to do until the banks took over. That's why Thomas Jefferson, I believe, it was either Thomas Jefferson or John Adams, so forgive me if I get it wrong, but on their deathbed, their last words were, I stopped the banks. They knew then, like they know now. I am against oppression. I'm against murder. I'm against theft of what doesn't belong to us. And it's all about control. Because think of it. Why is Africa so poor? Because remember, part of the quote-unquote Middle East is Northern Africa. They seem to not want you to really think about that. But look on a map where Egypt is. That's North Africa. That's part of Africa. But they call it the Middle East, so you just focus on that one little section of a humongous continent. Now, if you know anything about Africa, It has tons of riches. They have diamonds. They have oil. They have lithium. They have plenty of fresh water, plenty of lumber, palladium, platinum, gold, silver, other precious metals. The way to control a country is by keeping them enslaved through debt. So what they will do, what countries will do to control other countries, to get their possessions, is to first go to leaders of certain villages of Africa and basically say to them, you have two choices. We'll give you all the money you want and you can live like a king and we'll protect you from your enemies and you'll be part of our system. You got to play ball. Or we'll murder you or have somebody else murder you and do a quote-unquote revolution or a revolt against you. We'll put information out in the world saying you're a bad person and you need to be eliminated and you'll be overthrown and murdered, and we'll replace you with somebody who will do what we say. A puppet government. I'm sure you've heard that word before. And then what they do is they don't give them money. They lend them money. So the leader of, let's just say, I'm going to make up a name, Poopy Kaka in Africa. I'm not trying to insult them, I don't want to say a wrong name. So let's just say there is an area of Africa called Poopy Kaka. And the leader of Poopy Kaka has been approached by our democratic government system. They happen to be sitting on a large diamond mine and gold and silver mines. Very wealthy for them if they were to sell it and manufacture it themselves. But we approach them and give them that whole speech. They think they're being protected. They're saying, wow, look at all the money I'm going to get. But they lend it to them. And if you know anything about lending, there's interest. You can't pay it back. What do? You have to start giving away your resources. So think of it like, for example, that they're always showing Africa as people that are starving and how they have no water. Now, I'm sure that might be true, just like it might be true if you look at videos of people that live in Detroit or parts of the Soviet Union and other parts of the world. There is poverty everywhere. I mean, just in our own backyard, how many millions of people are on welfare? But we don't focus on that. But think of it. They talk about water shortages in Africa. And I'm sure with desert areas, that is true. But with our ability to create pipelines, and if we spent more money on wells and helping people than to create weapons of mass destruction, there's no limit to what we could do to change that. But think about the water. They're always talking about there's a water shortage. Well, if you research anything about the world, you know that the water has always been here. Those oceans, the water that you're drinking, dinosaurs probably peed out millions of years ago. It evaporates, it turns into hydrogen and oxygen, and then eventually the two get back together again and become water and fall from the sky. All the water that is here has always been here, so there is no shortage. But what you do notice is corporations have purchased the rights to water. That's why you see water companies like from Coca-Cola, Nestle, and all these other companies that are buying it up. So can they make it seem like there's a shortage? Well, if you own it and you don't distribute it to certain people, that would make a shortage, wouldn't it? So it's a shortage based on greed and selfishness. What about food? They're always talking about how people in Africa are hungry, and I'm sure that's true. Just like there are people here that are hungry, just like there are people all over the world that are probably going to bed tonight with nothing in their stomachs. And yet you see, just in this country alone, because again, I live here, so I can't say anywhere else because I'm not there, you see a massive obesity problem here, where they do hot dog eating contests and food fights, and restaurants throwing out food again and again on a daily basis. And you're telling me We have a food shortage to the point where we can't send food over. They'll be glad to have telethons and take your money. Who knows what they do with that money? And if you know anything about a lot of these donation places, most of the money never goes to the very people that you think it will be going to. And if you think 100% of your contributions are going to the very causes that they're tricking you about, I'm sorry, you just don't focus and you don't pay attention. So the way to control places like Africa is to lend them money to the point where they cannot repay it, and eventually they have to give away their diamonds, their gold, their mines, their water, their lithium, their oil. So we benefit off of the theft of others. Think about that. And that's why so many people get murdered. It's just something that we as human beings should really start paying attention to. The murdering of other human beings is wrong. I mean, if you are attacked and you have no choice, it's either him or you, and you feel like you're in a life-threatening situation, that's a different story. But to purposely go and manipulate another type of people, it's happened throughout history. I mean, look what they did to the Mayans. Look what they did to the Aztecs. And look what they did to the American Indian, the Native American. But they'll tell you in propaganda stories and your education that, for example, Christopher Columbus came over and discovered America. Well, first of all, he didn't discover the continent of North America. He went into the Caribbean islands, which may be part of the Americas, but they lead you to believe they discovered America. But let me ask you this. How do you discover something that is inhabited by people? Think about that. That's like walking into somebody's house, and as they're sitting there eating dinner, oh, I discovered this house. No, you didn't. Somebody's already there. And what they don't teach you is Christopher Columbus, who was financed by the Spanish government, was to be there to kill and murder millions of native people. That's why they just fell off the face of the earth. They were murdered. It was genocide. Look up the word genocide. It's when governments kill their own people or murder a whole specific type of people. It's happened throughout history. How do we forget these things? That can happen again. Who knows? The idea is to stop being blind and looking away. Because people like me will be attacked for this stuff, will be made fun of, and they won't address the facts. They'll address the emotions or my character instead of the actual truth of this. And I refuse to condone murder and theft. I didn't understand it as I was younger. But to get the cheap things that people on Black Friday will trample over each other for at your local Walmart or Target or some other store are things that we got because we're allowing child labor, unfair labor practices, taking of their raw materials so we can benefit from it. But eventually people like the Chinese are going to have the last laugh. Because if you look over at China and you research if you don't know about this, the fact that China is building ghost cities, not ghosts as in real cities, but I mean like real ghosts. I'm talking about empty cities. And I'm talking about cities bigger than Manhattan, bigger than Los Angeles, bigger than Chicago. They have over 500 million people in the construction industry, which is almost double what we have in this entire country. Now you ask yourself, well, why are they doing that? Why would they build all these cities that no one's living in? Well, what is one thing that China does for us? Don't they buy our debt? Think about that. We're trillions of dollars in debt, but yet we're told we're a wealthy nation. How are you a wealthy nation if you're in debt? Think. China's buying our debt. And what they're doing with it is, instead of taking that money and putting it in their bank, they're getting rid of it as fast as they can to the point where they're building cities that people aren't even living in because they're turning those assets, or that currency, because it's not even an asset, they're turning that currency, getting rid of it as fast as they can, and building physical assets from it. And one day, they're going to say, time to pay the tab. Now, just think of it. If one day China decides to tell the U.S. government, guess what? We're not going to buy any more of your debt. And as a matter of fact, not only are we not going to buy it, you better start paying us right now. You have 30 days to make a payment. And we can't make it because they only make the principal amount when it comes to, quote unquote, the scam of money. They never make the interest. There is no intent to ever pay that back. That's why they keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. It's like having a credit card, maxing it out, not being able to pay for it, getting an extension so they give you twice the amount more in credit. You max that out with no intent of paying for it. Now you have a higher interest, and instead of just saying, all right, let's cut our losses, you get another credit card and another credit card, more interest and more interest, to the point where it's just insane. You couldn't afford it the first time. You're going to afford it the 100th time with all the extra interest? I don't think so. So just imagine when the Chinese, who now will own this country, even though they technically already do, approach everyone in America that's living here and been living here, watching their sports games, eating their popcorn and their candy, and watching all the latest gossip on the news and making fun of people like me and many others that tried to help you. And they say to you, people of America, we now own your country. So you have two choices. You could now work for us for 3 cents a day, and we'll give you a small little shack to live in, or have a nice swim. We don't care where you end up. You are evicted from this country. What do you think the people are going to do? You think they're going to work for 3 cents a day and live in a little shack and become a third world country? Or do you think they'll say, oh, well, we just got evicted from our country because it's no longer owned by the people we were told owned it, because the banks really own it. I don't feel like swimming and hoping to find another place. So yes, it started out about war, but I want people to see the picture of things. I don't know how many more things I could talk about. And until we wake up from this illusion and these games and the people that, because the people that make fun of people like me and others, and the people that attack and the people who dismiss it or whatever, all you're doing is in the end hurting yourself. So what little money you may be getting paid to do this, if you are, eventually that's like going around bragging that you have the most monopoly money. What good is it going to do you when the system has collapsed? Because I've told people there will never be a nuclear war, in my opinion. Because again, if you are a cattle rancher, if you murder all your cattle, well, then you have to do everything yourself. You're definitely not going to make any money off of corpses, especially ones that are nuclear reacted and scattered like little micron pieces. But there will be an economic collapse. There has been thousands of times throughout history. And that's why they say if you don't research history, you're doomed to repeat it. So you could make plenty of money by hurting others and looking the other way and getting your bribe money and things like that. But one day you may wake up and find out that all that money is worth about as much as, those magic beans. And then what? You're going to brag that you have 10 million magic beans? What good is it then if you can't use it? The system is meant to be corrupting. Power corrupts. I mean, unless, of course, you guys can tell me wherever you live throughout the world that your government has done nothing but make the world a better place. Has that ever happened throughout history? Or is there constant wars and revolutions and famine and disease and the holding back of truth and knowledge, keeping you away from nature? I mean, the writing's on the wall. So that's all I have to talk about with this video. If you guys appreciate this stuff, whatever you want to do with it is up to you, because that's the beauty of free will. Free will gives you the choice to do the right thing, the wrong thing, or absolutely nothing. I can't tell you what to do. But if you're standing there and somebody's repeatedly punching you and you do nothing, that's your fault. If you stand there while the person's repeatedly punching you and you hold up a picket sign saying this is unfair, how is that going to stop him? It's not doing anything. It's all about drowning in good intention. But even if you're drowning in good intention, you're still drowning. So thanks for watching, guys. I don't get to reply that often these days because some of the stress levels of things that I deal with just makes it a little challenging. So forgive me for that, but I am reading your comments and I appreciate each and every one of them. So I hope you will understand that, considering for the past 5 years some of the mental anguish and abuse I've had to put up with. Not only on this channel, but another channel I tried to do to relieve myself the stress from this place. It's followed me there. But strength comes from within, and it takes many to abuse the few. Which ironically is funny because when it comes to governments, it's the few that abuse the many. But we let them. When do we stop? Thanks for watching, guys. My name is Chris. This is my channel, Barnon11970. Please hit subscribe if you would like to see more of my videos. Check out my playlists, and have a great day, and spread truth, and don't ever forget, we are all human beings. Peace and love to all.